Welcome back to another episode of the Chad and Chong podcast, where we have conversations about performance, productions, and everything in between. I'm Chad.
And I'm Chong.
In today's episode, we'll be covering life on the road versus at home, which we both have experience in.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and tell me your experience first on the road and at home? What does a musician's life look like on the road versus at home?
Yeah. Let's go from the best parts of touring, okay? And traveling. You get to see the world on somebody else's dime. That's how I see it. Essentially, you're not paying for anything. You know, you have your hotel covered. You get per diem, which for those that don't know, per diem is essentially just your food expenses for the day. Typically, it's anywhere between $50, to $75 a day, right? And so you get to see different parts of the country, and the United States, particularly if you're traveling domestically. Those are some of the pros. The cons, definitely, you're away from family. Your sleep schedule is jacked up. Mm-hmm. You don't really have anything consistent, and it's early lobby call times pretty much all the time. Either to get to the venue or to get back to the airport when we leave. Mm-hmm. What about you, man? Like, what's your experience so far?
Yeah, on the road, it's kind of funny because I do realize like you're gone a lot this year, or you've been gone. You've been traveling a lot, and I've actually been settling in more to LA. I recently moved a couple years ago.
Yeah.
We're both from the IE Inland Empire. But I did a lot of traveling and touring like a decade ago. And to be honest, I thought I'd be doing that forever.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that I encounter on the road, they're like, oh, no, man, you can't do this forever. It's a young man's game. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to prove you wrong. And I remember my very first tour, one of the musicians was like, oh, this is your first like tour, like long stay. And it was like a winter tour too. It was like 2 months. I was like, yeah, it's my first time on a real tour bus and with bunk beds, 12 bunks in one bus, stacked three high for all those touring musicians that know that lifestyle, and he was like, yeah, you're going to get sick. I'm like, me? No, because I never get sick. I get sick like twice a year.
Yeah.
Sure enough, by the second or third night, I was sick. And I was sick for like 10 or 12 days. And it was miserable.
Yeah.
And then sleeping again on a moving vehicle. It took some time to get used to. But yeah, I did that for, I'd say a majority like 3 to 5 years.
Oh yeah, that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was doing that. And it started off with a lot of what we call fly dates. Mm-hmm. Which is right, like usually it's they'll fly you out to the destination a day before, maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
Honestly, there's been a lot of times where we fly the day of, morning of, and you're talking about early lobby call times, 3 a.m.
Yep.
So that you could be at your 5 a.m. flight and go East Coast or whatever.
Yeah.
That
and
a lot of that
straight to sound check.
Straight to sound check. Yeah. Grabbing breakfast, in the airport, things like that. But when I first did. Really heavy touring, I remember I actually I had it on a Word document, and I wrote down, I forgot what year, this was probably like 2011 or 12. I wrote down every single gig that I did and how many times I played, and I think within that year I almost hit 300 dates or 300 times that I played.
Yeah.
And it was really crazy because my first major 2-month tour bus tour, we were doing 6 nights. And this was with a pretty big Christian artist. So we weren't even doing just 6 nights. We would do like Sunday morning, like church service. We would take over their like message portion.
Oh, okay.
So we'd do a 45-hour set. And, I remember one Sunday, we would do 3 services that Sunday. We'll do a 5 o'clock show at that same church while there was another setup happening at a church like 30 minutes down the road.
Wow.
And we'd go over there and do an 8 o'clock. So you're talking 5 times in one day, plus the 6 nights. So that's 11 times that we played in 1 week. And that was a tour where I got sick because I was like, this is insane. But it takes a lot on your body. And me being in, almost my mid-30s, like, yeah, those old guys were right. It's a young man's game, and I loved it. I love traveling. I love, like you said, I didn't pay for, my airfare or any of that stuff.
Right.
And it was really cool. But I definitely enjoy being at home
Yeah.
right now and,
Yeah.
and kind of establishing myself here.
Yeah, a lot of this year has been a lot of one-offs. So I just fly into to a certain state for 2 days at most, and then come back home. And thankfully, haven't been traveling out of LAX because
Yeah.
for me it's tough, man.
That's
it's
a whole
tough.
nother story.
Yeah, LAX is a tough airport. If you're not close by that one, we don't normally fly out of John Wayne. So
Nice.
that's been nice. It's straight to literally there's parking real quick. You walk straight to the terminal if you got the TSA pre, which, a little side tangent, get your TSA pre-check, get clear if you have that. If you have a travel credit card that gives you lounge access, it's such a game changer. You get to go in, get some free food real quick. If you need to shower, freshen up, whatever, before your next, flight or whatever, it helps so much, and you can actually refuel. I found that to be extremely useful, and I finally, like, all of my friends are telling me, dude, like, there's these cars that will offer you these incentives, if you travel often. So this year was, a blessing to get all those things in order.
Yeah.
It's a little side thing if you guys find yourself traveling a lot.
And TSA pre-check is $85 for 5 years.
Yeah.
And I waited for the longest time to get that, but it's an absolute game changer.
Yeah.
I mean, you literally, I think the longest I've ever waited in security was maybe 15 minutes.
Wow. Yeah.
On TSA pre-check. Everything else, it's like a minute.
Well, I'll one up you on that. I got the global entry. So that was an extra $15. Essentially, you land back, I'll give you the example from Mexico back in, I think, April or May. Landed in the U.S. Instead of doing the whole interview, how long were you in Mexico for? What were you doing there? Did you bring anything back? I went up to like a kiosk.
Oh, yeah.
They scanned my eyes and they said, "Welcome back, Kevin." Walk straight through. While the rest of all the homies were in line waiting for an extra 10, 15 minutes.
I don't think that existed a decade ago.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe. No, maybe not. Maybe
I
not.
don't know about that
Yeah,
one.
global entry is great though, but an extra $15 gives you that. It's just because of the pandemic, it took almost 7-8 months to get.
Wow.
Yeah, quite a long time. But yeah, that's just a little side thing for you guys.
So what kind of opportunities are out there on the road? Like, what does work look like on the road as a musician?
We show up to the venue, and by the time we get there, musicians I'm talking about, all the instruments are already set up. You just show up to the venue. I sent in a rider, as we call it, and I tell them exactly what drums I'd like, the throne I'd like, the cymbals I'd like to have, snare preference, all these things. And by the time I get there, really the only thing I have to adjust is levels, like where I want the height of the cymbal, particularly. As far as in-ears, we run for all the sessions we've done this year, everything is stereo in-ears, which is great. I finally got some customs after, I don't know, a long time. I don't know why I didn't do it. Pull the plug. Thank you, 1964, by the way. Phenomenal. Yeah, we show up, do a sound check, run the songs, as we would in a live setting, and then we will do the actual service or the event the day after we sound check. It's not so much like you where you show up to sound check and then you play that night. It's more so we just show up a day earlier, do the sound check, make sure we're good, and then we come back the next morning and do the service. Particularly these events have been with influence music. So that's been pretty cool. That's kind of been the setup so far, and it's been great. The whole crew is great to work with, and that's typically what's been like. It's on you to execute as best as you can, making sure you know all the material. As a drummer or musician, you should already know and have that in your mind. Like, okay, this is what I'm going to play, be intentional about it, and so on, So,
Yeah, I think if you guys aren't familiar with the road and touring and all that, as a musician, as a sound engineer, there's a lot of different kinds of work, right? Like what you just mentioned was you basically a touring drummer, right?
Yeah.
And you show up and you're with a particular group,
Right.
But there's also like the more longer term like tours. When you're part of a bigger tour, whether you're a crew or you're a musician or you're techs for those musicians. Like you said, you would set up cymbals. Well, the bigger tours actually have drum techs, or guitar techs, or things like that, where their whole job, and they're musicians too, but their whole job on the road is to actually make sure that you're even more set up,
Right.
and you're not thinking about that, and you're not having that stress of, oh man, is it the right cymbal? Is it
Exactly.
the right, did they change the drum head? when you get to that level, you get to show up and everything's to your specifications.
Right, right.
That's kind of one work opportunity. Another opportunity that I can think of is tour managing. And, a lot of musicians, including myself, I actually dabbled in tour managing. Again, it's not just the actual playing of music, because there's so much logistics and things that happen or that need to happen on the road. There's all these opportunities for work that involves music or that involves certain skills that's tied into the music.
Right.
I got to actually even be a booking manager for an artist for a little bit while I was actually tour managing while on tour. And
can you say that all again?
So there was a moment, I think it happened for about like 2 or 3 weeks, where because of on the road, I made some connections.
Yeah.
And and I've never been a booking manager. But yeah, this one guy was like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" Because he was impressed with my my tour skills, my organization, and all that. And I was tour managing that tour, which was headlined by 3 different bands. And then I was front of house engineer for the main band.
Okay.
So those were 2 hats that I was already wearing.
Yeah.
And then I think, by the second week or something, this guy asked me to be, if I wanted to do a little extra side gig. So I also said, okay, sure. And for like, I think 11 days or something, I was actually also booking
wow, man.
This artist. So I was doing 3, I was wearing 3 hats on the road, and it was crazy. Like, you learn a lot when you're on the road. I can definitely say that in the condensed amount of time that you're out there, again, like I think we talked about this in one of the episodes, you're barely actually playing music
right.
when you're on the road.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you're traveling 10 hours a day or something like that, and you have a lot of downtime, there's so many people that, as part of the crew that it takes to put on a show, that I was just curious about everything. And so I would pick everybody's brains. And I mean like everybody, including the bus drivers, which actually have like some of the best stories. I remember one time we were in New Jersey, and it was like 5 a.m. And I didn't know that buses did this, but they would go to actual bus washes and get the bus washed, overnight or whatever, because you're obviously traveling a lot. And I remember I had to wake up because I had to go, use a restroom. It was like 5 a.m. in the morning. I went to the rest area. I came back in, and the bus driver was like, "Oh, do you know who that is? Next to us, like the bus next to us, getting another bus wash." I was like, "No." He's like, "Oh yeah, that's Maroon 5." And I was like,
"Wow,
you're kidding!" In the middle of New Jersey at 5 a.m. He's like, "Yeah, because I know their bus driver, and that's Maroon 5 right there." And I was like, "Man, it's just crazy." So talking to the bus driver, talking to the tour manager, talking to this booking agent, talking to so many people, actually allowed me the opportunity to find more work.
Yeah,
even though I was just hired for maybe just the tour manager for that work.
Exactly.
And I think that's, we talked about networking and relationships. That's the importance of also just talking to people and you don't know what kind of opportunities are out there until you actually start networking and talking to other people.
Yeah. What Chad's saying is crucial because, we have to make sure that as musicians, we're providing immense amount of value, I would say. Everybody just thinks it's just about talent, how well you play. It's not just about that. It's how approachable are you? The humility aspect. Can I talk to you? Can we hang out outside of music? Because again, we're only on stage an hour and a half, 2 hours at most. The rest of the day, you're hanging with the crew. You might be sharing a hotel room with another musician. And so you want to make sure that you're as approachable as possible. It doesn't do well to be introverted in the industry. I would agree with that. You want to make sure that you just provide the best hangs as possible because, you want people to not just think of you as, oh, well, this guy can play so well, and he's a great drummer, or a great bassist, and the conversation stops at that. You want it to be, yeah, he's a great bassist, and you know what? He's a great hang. He knows all the good food spots. I'm about to have some Ono after this, So I think, providing value, like Chad is saying, is so important, in the music industry. What would you say are some pros and cons, Chad, on doing music on the road versus being at home?
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, you get to travel, the world, really, if that opportunity, presents itself. Like I said, the amount of things that you run into within a fairly short amount of time, it's insane because there's so many moving parts to making one show go. And sometimes because you are stuck with, those people or you're stuck at a venue for 10 hours, you're forced to interact, or
Right.
maybe you just naturally interact. So I think learning the industry and more about how the industry works rather
Right.
than just how music works.
Yeah, yeah.
That's definitely another pro of touring. And I'd say a con is then being so exclusive maybe to those group of people that a lot of your friends or network back home might forget about you.
Yeah.
And so once the tour is done, and this is one thing that I know a lot of musicians don't even talk about, but once a tour is done and you get back home, usually people kind of move on and they've forgotten
Yeah,
about you.
yeah.
And you still need to pay bills and you still need to, eat and stuff. So how can you find work if you're not putting yourself out there and basically saying, hey, I'm back. Did you find another bassist or do you need one? I'm back. So that's kind of a con that you have to be more active about.
Yeah.
Just when you get back home and once the tour ends, because everybody thinks you're just out living the life and doing this, but every tour ends and you got to get back home somehow.
Yeah.
And so what do you do after?
Right.
Another thing that I do want to touch on is also kind of the mental and emotional state. And I wish there was, back when I was doing this again, like a decade ago, I wish there were podcasts and things like that where people were talking about it, because what they don't tell you about is the extreme low that you hit.
Yeah. I was
after a
gonna.
tour.
I read an article about this. You might be touching the same subject
Yeah.
that I was gonna touch on, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, again, a pro of touring, usually you're on $1 million tour bus.
Yeah.
Right? There's 12 bunks, 50-inch flat screen TVs. You arrive at a venue, there's catering. Sometimes you're at 5-star hotels, all these things. Again, food's paid for per diem. You're living the life. And if you're with a fairly well-known artist, they kind of, look at you a certain way and they treat you a certain way.
Right.
And then you get home and there's nothing. And it's like you're back to like plain clothes Chad.
Yeah.
And, you realize, okay, it's back to, PB&J sandwiches, microwavable dinners, like things like that. And then again, like because everybody thinks that you're out on the road still, work stops.
Yeah. Yeah.
And whether you're plugged in with a church or you had steady studio sessions or just even regular gigs at certain local clubs, all that stops when you've been gone for 4, 5, 6, 11 months.
Yeah.
And nobody talks about the low that you hit because you've just been living the life for
Right.
2 weeks, 2 months or whatever. And there's really nobody checking in on you because the rest of our peers are also busy.
Yeah.
They're doing other things. And so there's not really that, network of checking in on, hey, man, I know you just got back from tour. Are you doing okay? Do you want to hang out?
Exactly.
Things like that. I think it's okay to acknowledge as musicians that we go through that. And actually, I think I just saw John Mayer post like a YouTube short talking about it, because he just came off another tour recently. And, with the pandemic going on and nobody was touring for 2 years, I believe that the tour that he just did, was such a high and such a great moment with great musicians, and he just got to play his music because he didn't release an album, he didn't do anything, so he got to play his classics. And then he's like back in Montana or in LA, and he's like, hey, I'm just being real with you guys. Like, I have nothing going on. I'm kind of depressed, and this is yes, I'm a big artist, but even somebody like me,
man.
I go through this.
Yep.
Like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
I just came off, enjoying playing my music that I've played for 20 years. Now what?
Yeah.
And he's like, I still go through this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's something that, I feel like it should be talked about more and just, shared with each other to help, our mental state.
Yeah. One of the parts of the article was stating how, you're at a constant high when you are performing in front of thousands of people. You have the energy of if you're playing at the LA Forum, or Staples Center, and thousands of people are, you're at a part where it's a guitar solo, or it's a bass solo, or drum solo, whatever, or just the music's just killing, and you're just hearing these loud screams that go beyond your in-ears, and it's just this constant high. And then you come home and you don't have the room service, you don't have the free food, you don't have all the excursions that you would otherwise have, when you were on the road. And it's like, okay, well, Now it's just family. If you have family, which you should also, if you have that luxury of having, a wife and kids, it's something. It's a blessing, But for a lot of people that, especially now that mental health is such a big thing in the United States of America, it's something worth talking about because understanding that those highs of music, they're temporary, and you have to make sure that you always separate. A MD friend of mine, man, mentioned how the musician life is very much a fantasy. I can be here today, and then tomorrow I'm in Dubai.
Yeah.
I can be here today, and tomorrow I'm in Egypt or some rural part of the world. And it's like, oh man, we were just talking, and now Kevin's like, 4,000 or 5,000 miles away. It's not a real thing. And so how do we separate reality, from everything else? It's like understanding that doing these tours and these one-offs and these events and playing for these big venues, it's a part that I would say it's great to add to your resume, but it should never define you, And so I think Chad bringing up these points and understanding mental health and making sure that you follow up with your friends. Before the pandemic happened, I had a friend of mine who was also, a notable music director. He reached out to me and he kind of convicted me, man. He told me, he's like, hey, bro. He's like, I'm just reaching out. He's like, I noticed that you haven't hit me up. And I was like, oh, bro, like I see you touring. You're hitting all these major venues. You're doing these stadiums. And, I just think of it as like, you're just enjoying yourself. You don't need me to reach out. And he's like, bro, this is actually when I need my friends the most. And he's like, I wish you would be more consistent in reaching out, make sure I'm good. I felt very convicted after that instance. I made it a point that when some of my friends, close friends were out on the road or touring, whatever, they're gone more than, a week and a half, 2 weeks. I just send them a quick text, bro, how you doing? Is everything okay? Like, how's the tour running?
Yeah.
Because a lot of it's lonely time too. You're by yourself, it's like that.
We've been talking a lot about the road, but what does what kind of work opportunities are kind of at home? Say, I know it doesn't always happen in a lot of major cities, or there's certain cities that obviously have more opportunities for musicians and producers, and LA, Nashville, New York. But what kind of work opportunities can be found if there's something that you want to do and that's more consistent, maybe more in your home?
So if you grew up in the church is obviously one of the things that is very consistent. Every Sunday there's a service. If you do SDA, there's every Saturday, Seventh-day Adventist, you guys have a service. And if you're fortunate enough and the church is able to, they compensate you for your time being there. So I know a lot of the musicians, when they're not touring, they're at their church. They're serving or, playing, whatever aspect it is, but they're getting compensated for it. Another thing, another field that I would say for myself that I work in is with corporate bands and agencies. A lot of it is, corporate weddings, private events. There's so many agencies here in LA. You don't even have to go as far as like having to leave the state. There's so much work here in LA if you wanted it, So it's just a matter, I think, of it being a word of mouth situation too. You letting your friends know, hey man, like I'm looking for more work. If you're looking for that, if that's something that interests you, you reach out to them and say, hey bro, like, if the agency that you work for needs a sub, because maybe you can't make it at times. I used to do that initially when I first started because I had learned so much top 40 music. I was like, man, I don't want to just play with this agency. I'm pretty sure, I can almost bet that every other agency is doing these songs. And sure enough, man, up to this point, I'm glad I put in the work to, learn that much material, because a lot of the agencies do a lot of the same music. Sometimes there's specific arrangements here and there, but for the most part, the song is verbatim, the way the track was recorded. So you just show up, you play, again, it's about the hangs afterward because you have that downtime in between your breaks, so just getting to know, other musicians, what they do, what streams of income they have, and just continually trying to grow. You've worked with some of the agencies I've worked with, as a sound tech. Yeah. How'd you get into that?
Yeah, I mean, again, sound, I guess in general, it came out of a necessity for me. I remember doing rehearsals with my band for a couple different things, and sound guys would never show up or they'd be super late. So I was kind of forced to learn that. And, now we record this in my studio, and I obviously have my own studio. But like I said, I used to do a lot of touring a decade ago. Now I'm really trying to establish more home things because I like being able to go home,
right,
and clocking out, even though we never clock out. Again, being in LA, I think it has a lot of advantages for us. It's obviously notorious for studios, so there's a lot of studio work, even though it's not the same as it was back in its heyday in the 90s and 80s, 70s. I think the advent of home studios has created new opportunities.
Oh, definitely.
And I'd say one thing that you have to think of as a musician or producer, you really have to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And especially with technology and the power of the internet and social media, especially studios, you don't need to be in the major hubs like LA and Nashville. A lot of people that I follow have YouTube channels are in the middle of like Indiana or Kansas.
Wow.
But because they're the only ones, they're getting business.
All the work. Yeah, exactly.
And there's so many people now who are doing music or who have access to lessons. That's another thing you can do. You can give lessons. You can give lessons in person or online.
Yeah.
Make YouTube videos, tutorials. If you can provide a certain service in your city, and if you're the only one who's doing that, you could definitely create some sort of stability.
Yeah.
And really rise the ranks in that way. So you don't need to be a touring musician. You don't need to move to LA.
Yeah.
It's going to take work, obviously,
For
but
sure.
just like anything else, you love this. So hopefully you're going to refine your craft.
Yeah, that's good.
And, again, it's just about getting that business aspect of it and understanding, okay, this is what I want to do and this is what I need to do to pay my bills, and, keep your overhead low.
Yeah.
Advertise and make sure you put out a good product. That's one thing. In LA, obviously, there's a lot of venues here. So that's another way to get work. Literally, you just show up at a venue. Obviously, you could hit them up on email or things like that. And hey, I'm this. I have this resume. Are you looking for this? Do you have any work for me? Recently I've been working for a pretty large theater in downtown LA, and they've kept me really busy. And I've only been there for maybe a couple months, but I pretty much, because of all my experience in the past, probably within the third show, I kind of shot up to A1 already.
Wow, that's great, man.
Again, that's from transitioning to the road to the home thing.
Yeah.
And just putting yourself out there and trying to see what the city has to offer and seeing what can you offer it.
Yeah.
Because, pretty sure, especially if you're not in these more saturated, bigger markets, you might be the only one there, and use that as your advantage.
Yeah.
And you could really make a good living and a good life with the use of technology these days. And anything that you don't know how to do,
YouTube Academy.
YouTube University. There's so many podcasts just like this that hopefully you can learn from and take tips and apply them to your own situation.
We don't have to go too far, man, because you might know more about this too. Billie Eilish's brother, Phineas, didn't he record the album that she won multiple Grammys for at his home studio?
Yeah, in their bedroom. Yeah.
Wasn't it on Logic too?
It was on Logic, and they used a $70 microphone that I have sitting right here.
Wow, man.
A laptop and just that, and probably one of the most famous interfaces, a little Focusrite Scarlett.
That's
it started from that, and yeah, you're right. It's a Grammy winning album.
She's one of the biggest artists in the world now, and I think that camp is very small too. It was
absolutely.
I think it was her as the lead singer, Phineas on guitar, and then I think this dude Andrew Marshall, phenomenal drummer. It sounds great.
That's who they toured with for the longest time.
Yeah, that's right.
Just them three.
That's right. I saw that. Yeah. So there's opportunity out there if you look out for it. Chad's an example of this. He's a jack of all trades, where he was tour manager for one thing, production manager for the other, bassist for this, drummer for that, So it's just providing as much value as you can.
Yeah. So whether you're figuring it out or you've already kind of more established, versus if you want to do life on the road or stay more at home, I'd say just try it out. Try different experiences. Don't be afraid to go outside of the box.
Yeah.
And just like me, I thought I'd be on the road forever, and now I'm really enjoying being home. So if you try one thing and realize you don't like it, that's okay.
Yeah.
You tried it. You can move on to the next thing, and the most important thing is always make sure that you do it with passion.
That's good,
and
man.
that you still love what you do.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, this is a hard industry. This is a hard career.
Right.
but we do this because we love it.
Right.
And the
right.
moment you lose that love and that passion,
Yeah.
it's not worth it anymore.
Right. That's good, man.
So.
Yeah. Thank you guys for checking out today's episode. Make sure that if you haven't already, you subscribe on YouTube, or if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, you follow. So make sure you do everything you can to keep tuning in for each episode, and we'll see you guys on the next one.